As far as Wynne was concerned, Cassidy's whole noble thief thing had started 10 months earlier. The day in question wore the face of routine for most of it. Cass's senior year had just begun, and with it had come the return of school uniforms, after-school clubs, and the practiced fiction that life had settled back into something manageable. Wynne picked her up after drama club the way he always did. She climbed into the back seat, opened her homework, and spent the first stretch of the drive in silence, pen moving steadily across the page while the sedan drifted through late afternoon traffic. It might have stayed that way too, if not for the soft buzz of the burner phone she'd bought for the one loose end that had survived the summer. "Looks like our dear Marius is in motion," she said, after reading the text from the private eye she hired. Wynne's shoulders tightened. "Let's make a detour to the police station," she continued. "I've a strong feeling today is our day." Wynne did as told and turned them toward the city center, guiding the sedan through late afternoon traffic. Cassidy returned to stillness in the back seat as though detours to police stations were the sort of thing a person could fit neatly between homework assignments. When they reached the area, Wynne pulled into a nearby parking garage and took the spiraling ramps upward until they reached the top. He parked where they could have a view without offering one back. For a little while, neither of them said much. Then Wynne got out, crossed to the edge, and looked down at the streets below. 15 minutes dragged by before a car pulled up at the curb below. The man who stepped out of the back would have been recognizable to Wynne anywhere, which was unfortunate, because Marius had the sort of face Wynne could never fully escape. Looking at him was looking into an older mirror someone had tampered with. Same light bronze complexion, same broad lines, same black hair, only Marius wore his shorter and cleaner at the sides where Wynne kept his slicked back. Age had settled into Marius's face, but not enough to break the resemblance. It just made the whole thing worse. Wynne stared down at him with the familiar twist of disgust that always came with facing that man. Marius dismissed the car and headed for the station doors. Wynne's jaw tightened. Just walk in already, he thought. But of course he didn't. He stopped a few steps short, visibly wavering, like he was still trying to decide which version of cowardice suited him best. Then he adjusted his tie, squared himself up a fraction, and finally stepped inside. Something in Wynne's shoulders finally loosened. "Watching him like this," Cassidy said from behind. "Does it settle anything for you? The fact that he gets to vanish into witness protection is annoying, but outside of that, I've got no complaints. He's unlikely to enjoy the life waiting for him. Witsec is not freedom. It is tedium. Day after day of being too watched to maneuver, too hidden to leverage, too contained to become anything but a ghost with a file. If you ask me, it's a fitting conclusion." Cassidy drifted to his side and leaned over the edge with that small predatory smile of hers. "The wolf took the leash the second he realized the forest held something meaner than him." The big bad wolf tucked tail because of one little red fox. Cassidy jerked her head to Wynne and fired a glare. "I'm sorry, little? Would you prefer compact and vindictive red fox?" "Bold phrasing from someone within arm's reach." "I'll be more respectful of your terrifying stature," Wynne said, his mouth twitching as he turned back to the city below. From up there, Himidus looked exactly like what it was. Too large, too busy, and too full of lives in motion to stop for any one man's downfall. Cars streamed through the arteries of the city. Sidewalks teemed with commuters, doors opened, shut, opened again. Somewhere beneath all that movement, Marius had just stepped into the next miserable chapter of his life, and the city, with all the ceremony of a passing shrug, had carried on. "Well," Cassidy said, stepping away from the ledge, "that concludes today's entertainment. We've no reason to remain." Wynne nodded, though his eyes lingered on the station a second longer before he finally stepped away. It was a strange thing, watching the end of someone's power look so ordinary. No spectacle, no reckoning worth the name, just a frightened man in a suit disappearing through a set of public doors. Still, ordinary or not, it was done. Wind touched with the dry bite of autumn as they made their way back across the roof of the garage. Cassidy moved with that same unbothered elegance she always seemed to have, like the world only ever managed to confirm what she'd already decided. Wynne, meanwhile, felt like he was still catching up to the fact that the waiting was over. By the time they reached the sedan, the moment had already felt as though Cassidy had filed it away undersolved. She slipped into the back seat and opened her homework again with infuriating ease. Wynne got in behind the wheel, started the car, and guided them down through the spiraling levels of the garage. Then they were back on the road to Cain Manor, folding into the current of traffic as if the day had never broken pattern at all. The world narrowed to familiar things. The low hum of the engine, the gentle thrum of tires beneath them, the muted pulse of evening traffic beyond the glass. Cassidy said nothing for a while. She simply sat in the back seat with one leg crossed, homework open, contributing only the occasional whisper of paper and the neat scratch of her pen. Wynne let the quiet stand until she, as if picking up the most ordinary thread in the world, broke it in a tone of easy, casual thought. "Hey, Wynne, are you familiar with the story of Reinhard the Trickster?" Wynne's brow furrowed faintly. He wasn't some folklore scholar, but he knew the broad strokes. The fox told tells, earned tales, and protected humanity. It was pretty basic stuff. More or less. What about it? How about the heretic scribe, or the I was supposed to die in the 3rd chapter so I changed the genre serials? No, I can't say I know either of those. Also, what's with that 2nd title? Did their editor get taken hostage or something? I'm not sure when absurdly long titles became fashionable, but it is what it is. Title aside, the books themselves are surprisingly entertaining. It's about a girl from our world waking up inside a video game she knows, stuck in the role of the evil princess. Because she's aware the usual storyline results in her death, she immediately tries to bolt. The problem is, the plot keeps closing around her anyway, so the whole thing turns into her trying to beat fate at its own game. Right, Wynne said. Okay, well, first things first, what made you pick that for whatever point you're building to? Why'd you even pick it up? Rebecca recommended it to me, she answered, referencing one of her 2 closest friends. And I'm referencing it since it is a stellar example that illustrates a pattern I've noticed. And that pattern is what exactly? The presence and role of the trickster. It is a recurring archetype throughout all of Orida, independent of era or culture. In fact, if the Galdist creation narrative holds any truth, then a trickster is the reason our world turned out this way. That's one way of putting it, Wynne thought as a little tension gathered at the base of his neck. On one hand, she had a point. If the Book of Sundering wasn't complete nonsense, then Jura, Galdism's neat little patron goddess of beauty, wisdom, and all the usual polished virtues, had more in common with a trickster than people were probably comfortable admitting. She was, after all, the one who brought Dimbra, the ruin bringer, the adversary, the plan that put their father into a divine coma. On the other hand, taking something so many throughout the Republic of Hymialis treated as sacred and treating it as a literary device seemed a bit glib. Why do you think that pattern keeps showing up? Cassidy continued. No matter the culture or the era? You obviously already came up with something, so why not skip the suspense and just tell me? Cassidy gave a thin, aggravated sigh and tipped her head back. I would appreciate it if you took this seriously for a moment. Wynne flicked to the rearview mirror and found Cassidy looking back with a grave expression. I'd say it's because people need order, he said as his gaze returned to the road. But order always has cracks, misses things, traps the wrong people, shields the ones that shouldn't. And since most people can't fight it straight, the trickster keeps returning. The one who can slip through the weak points, beat the powerful at their own game, and prove the system isn't as solid as it pretends. People don't merely build systems, they mythologize them. They wrap them in reverence, fear, and ritual until someone forgets they were made by human hands. The trickster is the only one who reveals that the edifice was never sacred, only protected. They cut things back down to size and drag them back to reality, and once that happens, the people buried beneath it can finally breathe. Something in Wynne's posture went rigid. Something in that line of thinking felt a little too clean, too charitable. Marius used to sound like that too whenever he wanted a target to seem deserving or a stepping stone job sound like part of some higher cause. Sometimes, Wynne said. Other times the trickster just becomes another thing people have to survive. Because when a person gets too used to treating every room like a game and every weakness like an opening, they stop seeing people properly. They just see what can be used. Trust becomes stupidity. Love becomes bait. Fear becomes a handle. And someone like that can do a lot of damage while telling themselves they're only being clever. Something in Cassidy's expression tightened. Then she turned her face toward the window and let the city take her attention instead. Buildings, headlights, passing signs. None of it seemed important enough to warrant the intensity with which she avoided looking at him. The silence that followed lasted longer than the usual ones. When Cassidy finally spoke, her voice was even and reflective, as if she were answering something deeper than the argument itself. Perhaps the trickster remains admirable only when it submits itself to a code. Cunning without constraint decays into something ugly. Thus, to avoid such a fate, the trickster must establish laws of its own. Wynn's jaw set. Why are you so deep in the weeds on this? Given what we just accomplished against Marius, I think the more relevant question is why you are not. That was a one-off. There's no reason it must remain a one-off. Would be better if it did. Like it or not, she said with firm conviction, the world needs someone willing to play the trickster. Marius talked like that too. Look how well that turned out. We are not your father. The word hit like something rotten and Wynn's mouth pulled tight. No, we aren't, Wynn said with clipped emphasis. Because we're not thieves. That little detail helps put a decent distance between us and Marius. If memory serves, our victory over Marius involved fraud, deception, and a very large number of crowns changing hands. That doesn't make us thieves. Marius stole from a charity. You got the money back for them. And the rest was basically the same investigative stuff you do with your gramps, just with a bit more flair. We're not criminals. When we committed fraud, theft by deception, criminal impersonation, financial infiltration, conspiracy, and coercion adjacent intimidation. I don't know how generous your definition of detective work has become, but mine does not include fraud as a central pillar. Wynn's grip went tight, and his irritation found the leather before it found words. He knew what they'd done. He wasn't stupid. But there was a difference between doing something once because the situation demanded it, and turning it into the thing that defined you. What they did was one operation. One. Singular. Contained. Finished. It was not a calling. Not an identity. Definitely not his. Explaining that to Cassidy's unlikely to accomplish much, if anything, he realized. Once she got attached to an idea, she developed the kind of persistence usually associated with natural disaster and very committed salespeople. At that point, it was better to play along, make her get specific, and trust the logistics would do what common sense apparently couldn't. Walk me through how this is even meant to work. I'm not saying yes to anything, I just want the explanation. A pleased little smile crossed Cassidy's face. She straightened slightly, collected the thread of her thoughts, and began. There's no shortage of honest people trapped in problems that can't be solved through normal channels. Why not make ourselves useful to them? How does this work in practice? How would an honest person even know how to contact us? People like that usually aren't networking with criminals. We could use the broker you got in touch for the... Cassidy halted briefly, her fingers coming to her chin while she sorted the next part into place. Huh. What are we calling the Marius job? The Marius job, I guess? Not sure why it matters. For the span of a second, Cassidy frowned to herself. Then she gave a small, dismissive shake of her head and continued. Let's put a cork in that for now. It feels like the sort of thing that'll be fun to revisit. Anyway, couldn't that broker you know find the sort of people we'd wish to help? A quiet pressure gathered beneath Wynn's ribs. The broker, a former contact of Marius's who went by Lila, was not, under any reasonable version of events, supposed to meet Cassidy. They didn't even know Cassidy was involved in the Marius job, which was good, because the alternative was a spectacularly stupid headline waiting to happen. Maybe, Wynn said, but I don't see why they'd bother. Give me a meeting, and I'm confident I can win them over. I wouldn't count on it. Cassidy answered with an amused little scoff. You say that as though persuasion isn't one of my better qualities. You and them are very different people. In what ways? For one, Wynn said, they're an anarchist. You're not exactly working from the same wiring. Do they charge for their services? Of course. Everybody's got to eat at the end of the day. Then our differences aren't nearly the obstacle you imagine them to be. Cash can solve a lot, Wynn said, but it doesn't buy trust. And unfortunately, trust is pretty important if you're dealing with the underworld. Cassidy paused with a small, thoughtful hum. I'm curious. Why are they an anarchist? Can we please just let this die? Why are they an anarchist? Wynn forced down a swallow and kept his eyes forward. He knew more about Lila than he felt comfortable bringing into this conversation. Cassidy's reaction was one potential problem. The fact that Lila preferred those details unadvertised was another. "Can't say I know all of it," he said, "but I've got some guesses. Whatever they went through, the system wasn't what helped them through their situation. People were. That's part of why they do what they do now." "So," Cassidy said, satisfaction curving through her voice, "you're saying this mystery broker understands why ordinary channels are not always sufficient?" Wynn clenched his jaw. Damn it. He'd need to adjust tactics. "You're not necessarily wrong, but I don't think it's the best idea to slot them into a role before you've even met them." "Then why not arrange a meeting with them?" "No. Not a chance." "Wynn, do you seriously not want to help the people the system leaves behind? Do you really not want to take down people like your father?" The word father sat wrong in Wynn's ears. His jaw set, and when he spoke, the anger in it was tightly contained. "I'm not going back to being August Wolf." "You wouldn't be," Cassidy said, voice firm. "Again, we are not Marius. We'd be helping people. And we can set rules for ourselves that keep us from ever becoming anything like him. Or, and I realize this lacks dramatic flair, we could just not do the thing that requires all the safeguards. People like us don't come along every day. If we won't do this because it's dangerous, then who do you imagine will?" Being able to do something doesn't automatically make it a good idea. "So," she said, her voice dropping into a low, challenge-laden chill, "because it's risky, we should do nothing? Leave people to suffer? Leave the ugliness we could combat untouched?" Wynn's fingers cinched around the wheel, his mouth pulling tight as he stared ahead. "For people like us," Cassidy continued, "doing nothing is not some neutral position. It's choosing our safety over people who have none. It's choosing our comfort over suffering we might have helped relieve." He shifted in his seat. No matter what he picked, the results seemed to be the same. His hands still weren't coming out clean. Maybe the mistake is in looking for an ethical choice that comes out spotless. People crossed each other. That was inevitable. Life ran on friction. And friction meant someone always paid something. So perhaps ethics wasn't really clean versus dirty. Maybe it was one stain versus a worse one. Or maybe it was just a matter of whatever stain you could stomach. Either way, it made the question he faced annoyingly simple. Was he the type to stay out of things, or the type to step in and act? For one brief moment, he imagined staying uninvolved. It would be easier, safer. But the idea curdled almost as soon as it formed, leaving behind a sour little shame he couldn't ignore. Damn it, he thought. Cassidy had, irritatingly enough, one unqualified point in her favor. People like them were rare. They occupied a very specific and inconveniently useful position. And if his hands were destined to end up dirty regardless, then he'd prefer that dirt came from something worth the moral expense. "If we do this," Wynn said, glancing up into the rearview mirror, "we do this with rules. A lot of rules. And we sort out all the logistics first, because I'm not getting dragged into something half-baked." "That's reasonable," Cassidy said, her lips curving with the restrained satisfaction of someone hearing the lock finally turn. "Well then, let's get to work. Let's first determine what it means to be a noble thief. Then we'll act accordingly." The next 6 months were spent turning impulse into infrastructure. What had begun as a reckless proposition was subjected to Cassidy's usual appetite for refinement until it hardened into process. Together, they worked out how targets would be chosen, what standards would govern those choices, how potential clients might be found without ever truly finding them, and how every step after that would function. Verification, approach, surveillance, contingency, exit, cleanup. They learned how to bury tracks before they were made, how to keep one lie from tangling another, and how to build a machine out of caution, nerve, and precision. Though, through all of it, Wynn noticed something he could not quite stop noticing. Cassidy was having fun. Problems seemed to sharpen her. The moment a difficulty emerged, some contradiction, some risk, some ugly little wrinkle that refused to smooth itself out, her eyes would light up. She loved the puzzle, loved the resistance, Loved, perhaps most of all, the chance to prove there was no knot clever enough she could not eventually untangle. Every now and then, Wynne found himself wondering what sat at the center of that hunger. He wondered if that side of her, the one that seemed most alive when pressed against complication, would remain in service to what they were building.
I signed the ledger with a borrowed name, smiled at the guard and he did the same. Not one alarm had to disagree. I was exactly who I seemed to be.